Hello, I'm Ariam, and this is my wrap-up of everything I've read in June of 2025. So decided to start with statistics this time. So I read 16 books in June. Of them, there were 4 realistic fiction, 3 historical fiction, 2 humor, 2 sci-fi, 2 mystery, 2 fantasy, 1 horror, and 1 poetry. So that was genres, and in age groups, 2 were picture books, 1 was an early reader's chapter book, 2 were middle grade, 3 were YA, and 8 were adult. Now in the next clip, you're going to see what I made 2-3 days ago, a few days ago, 2 days ago, of the actual list of books I read. Okay, so let's get into books I DNF'd. So actually the first book I DNF'd in May, but I forgot to put it in the May wrap-up, and that was Things You Won't Say by Sarah Pekkanen. So I read recently a book by Sarah Pekkanen, which was a mystery thriller, and I thought, excuse me one moment, let's get the table out of the way, thank you. And I thought that this was going to be a mystery thriller too. I thought that that was just what she wrote. Apparently she actually writes more realistic fiction. So the camera's angle weird. Okay. Now that's anyways. But it wasn't, and if I had taken it out as an ebook, I probably would have finished it. But it was an audiobook, which takes up more of my time, and I was finding it kind of boring. So I just didn't read it. Okay, now we're getting to the books I DNF'd in June. So I only DNF'd 1 book in May, but I did DNF more books than that in June. So the first book I DNF'd in June was Star Daughter by Shweta Thakrar. There was nothing wrong with this. It just really wasn't for me. It had way too much romance for me. If you look it up and it sounds interesting to you, you should read it. It's about this girl who is half Indian, half star. Her mom's a star, and she basically gets pulled into this star competition to be like the next heir of the stars. The next book I DNF'd was The Barrister and the Letter of Mark by Todd M. Johnson. It's a historical mystery, but I wasn't really enjoying it, and then I looked up reviews, and it seemed like there were even the people who enjoyed the book were like saying things that I personally really do not enjoy. So probably again another case of it's not the book, it's me, though it was a little more the book, because they were also complaining it, even the people who gave it 5 stars. And the last book I DNF'd in June was Anna of California by Andy Tarrant. I feel kind of bad for DNFing this one because the concept of this book is that it's a Anne of Green Gables retelling, and I love Anne of Green Gables. It was like my favorite book throughout my whole childhood. And the thing is, if this was not an Anne of Green Gables retelling, I probably would have read it and finished it. If it just hadn't been published that way. But it was published that way, and it's supposed to be a modern retelling, and it's nothing like Anne of Green Gables at all. So this book is about a foster girl who is sent to a farm to to where they'll judge if she is ready to be emancipated and live as an adult, even though she's not yet an adult. But the thing was, the characters weren't at all like they are in Anne of Green Gables. It was like the thinnest connection of her being an orphan. And that's all. And it was, and barely that too. And moving around a lot. And barely that too. So it was just like, I wanted to read an Anne of Green Gables retelling. And I was trying to convince myself I could enjoy it, even though I realize now it's not really an Anne of Green Gables retelling, but I couldn't go on with it. If it sounds good to you, maybe you should read it, but they just shouldn't have published it as an Anne of Green Gables retelling. That's all I can say. Okay, so now let's get into the books I actually read in June. So the first one I read, I don't even know what it's called. I thought I remembered the author. I do not remember the illustrator, but it was a picture book. I believe it was by Yoram Tarlev, and it was from the PJ Library, but I looked and looked and I couldn't find it. I read it with a kid, and I really liked it. It's basically this book, one of those classic children's books that teach you to like what you have, be satisfied with what you have, but it was, who's rich, the person who's satisfied with what they have. But it was really, I thought it was illustrated really well. The text and the illustrations worked really well together, so I really liked that. Now, to the books that I actually know what they're called. So the first book I finished in June was Orleans by Sherry L. Smith. This is a science fiction dystopia book where a combination of natural disasters and mainly a horrible plague make it so that the United States basically makes the Gulf states, which are Louisiana, Florida, Texas, and a few others, I think maybe Georgia, secede from the United States, and they build a giant wall to keep them off. And ours happens, and that happens in like 2020. This was written before Corona, and like 2013 it was written, but the book happens in the 2050s, and we follow two characters. One who is in charge of a baby, and she's trying to get the baby out over the wall before the baby gets this plague. And the other is a guy who comes in from outside and tries to cure the plague. I did a reading vlog of this, and I enjoyed it. I did have a few quibbles with some things, but overall I enjoyed it. And I thought it was a fun sci-fi dystopia, even if the science didn't always work. Okay, next book I read in June was another picture book. It was Moving House by Barbara Taylor Cork. I don't have much to say about this. It was just about these two kids who move houses, and it was just to showcase the different reactions that kids can have to moving house. It was just in my general vicinity, so I read it. I thought it was good at showing the different reactions, and I thought it was good at showing how to cope, like, with the bad feelings that you have, and that they're okay. Okay. Next I read The Devil Makes Three by Tori Bovilano. Also did a reading vlog on this one. This is a kind of more classic horror. It's about this girl who is working in a library because, like, basically to pay for her schooling. And there's this guy who's the son of the principal comes to stay, and he's looking at all these deep magic books, and they accidentally, while exploring the library to get these deep magic books, they accidentally summon a demon, and then they have to deal with that. Or the devil. They accidentally summon the devil. I enjoyed it. I thought that the characters were really well written, but I did think the romance was a bit too insta-lovey. Okay. The next book I read in June was The Norton Introduction to Poetry, which was anthologized by J. Paul Hunter. I did not read the parts in the back about that were like teaching like how to write about poetry. I just read the poems, and I wrote like the introduction. And this book is divided into like parts that, like, it's talking to, like, there's one part that talks about experience poetry, that, like, the very beginning, like, the experience you have, one about poems that have expectation surprise, one about poems that the situation is very important, like the setting, one about poems where the structure of the poem is very important, stuff like that. So obviously poems could technically be in more than one category, but he would choose the category. And overall, I think he did a very good job, and I thought the poems in here were good. I'm going to say it, though. There's one poet that's really famous that I don't remember their name. The classic poet who wrote, like, in nonsense in old lowercase. I don't get why they're famous. So I did sometimes feel like some of the poems in here were more in here because the authors were famous, but for the most part, like, for 90%, like, I felt that even if I didn't like the poem, I understood why it was chosen and why it represented the thing that it represented. And I really did like most of the poems in here as well. Okay, next book I reread the first Big Nate book by Lincoln Pierce. And I also read a collection of the comic strips. So if you don't know, Big Nate was a comic strip by Lincoln Pierce, kind of like, Garfield's. There are collections of the comic strips. And then he also wrote a book series, kind of like Diary of a Wimpy Kid, but better, in my personal opinion, where he put more depth into the characters and more depth into the incidents. And so the first Big Nate book is Big Nate in a Class by Himself. And the comic collection I read was Big Nate, What Could Possibly Go Wrong? And I loved revisiting the characters, and also sometimes something that is so fun when you rewatch the first season or reread the first book of a series is in series like this. I think it happens more in TV shows because they're much less planned out because they don't know if they're going to cancel it or not. And usually, even if not usually, authors get a contract for a certain amount of books, and even if they don't, it's very often they've planned out this whole series. It's not like TV shows have episodes, but book series literally have series, have books. Anyways, but one of the things that's most interesting is that you can see like what changed, like how the characters changed. Maybe this character had this personality, or this character had this connection. This character was really big in this book but never appeared again. This characters didn't appear in this book but were very small characters in this book but appear later. So I thought that was really good. I did enjoy the comic strips less. Like, they're funny, they're cute, but I like the story a lot better. Okay, so the next book I read was a collection, Bodies from the Library 2, Lost Tales of Mystery and Suspense from the Golden Age of Detection, which was edited by Tony Medaway. I did a vlog on this as well. I had some mixed feelings, definitely. There were some While I liked the longer stories in this book, I thought the shorter stories were pretty much a miss. And he also just put in stories that weren't mysteries, but were by mystery authors. And it's supposed to be the subtitle is literally Tales of Mystery and Suspense. So I thought that while the editor wasn't very good, I thought that the longer stories were good. Okay, the next book I read was The Last Merlin Mission Magic Treehouse book, Night of the Ninth Dragon by Mary Pope Osborne. This was also the last one to be illustrated by Sal Murdoka. So in this one, Jack and Annie. Okay, if you don't know the Magic Treehouses, there are two character siblings, Jack and Annie. They find a magic treehouse, they point at books, they can go wherever the book is, they will get missions that they need to go on. The Merlin mission books they're just longer books because these are books to teach children to read. So the original Magic Treehouse books are for very early readers, while the Merlin missions are for children who are slightly better at reading. Anyways, so they get a mission to go to Camelot, and it turns out that King Arthur is sick, and he needs this magic that's on this magical island, which is also where both Morgan and Merlin are. But someone stole the statue of a dragon, and you need to have 9 dragons, statues of 9 different dragons, in order to get to this island. So they have to go and steal it back. This wasn't the best Magic Trails book, in my opinion. It took me a long time to read this, which is crazy because these books usually take me like an hour. Part of that is because I thought it was the last Magic Treehouse book, because I'm not interested in the super special Magic Treehouse book. However, there is a Magic Treehouse book coming out tomorrow. Not a Merlin mission, Magic Treehouse. But I also thought this just didn't have a really fun plot. Like, they've rescued King Arthur before. It just kind of starting to feel kind of tired, and like, King Arthur's the king. Can't he ever rescue himself? Like, can't he ever do anything for himself? Like, all that happens in the books is that other people are rescuing him. Not only Jack and Annie, like, everybody else is rescuing him. But when I thought like the appearance of the dragon was really rushed over, I liked Jack and Annie. I love Jack and Annie discovering where the dragon was hidden, like when they discovered where it was stolen and all that. But that's the only part of the book I liked. It wasn't terrible. I just thought that it wasn't very well written. Oh, and also, I remember what I hated about this book was that it had the trope of a blind character being mystical and magical, and she can know that Jack and Annie look like even though she can't see because she has magic. Hate that trope. Really annoys me. I don't even know why. Anyways, moving on. The next book I read was Whose Body by Dorothy L. Sayers. This is the first book in the Peter Wimsey series, which is a mystery series with Peter Wimsey as the detective. It's kind of like a cross between Sherlock Holmes and Bertie and Wooster books by P.G. Wodehouse. So I read 2 short stories, I think. Could be 3, but I believe it's 2. And one book later in the series, Strong Poison. And I really love the first short story I read. I also love Strong Poison, and my mom loves it too. Which doesn't usually happen. We usually read very different books. But this book, I thought you could definitely tell it was more at the beginning of her writing. And, okay, I had a problem with it. That's not like a problem. How do I put this? I really struggle with this book because of, like, this one thing. I'll say it. She was very progressive, and she was not anti-Semitic, from what I understood from this book. So the guy who's murdered in this book is a Jew. We know that from the very beginning, okay? It's not spoilers or anything. This is, like, first chapter. And so, obviously, Peter Wimsey has to go, like, talk to Jewish communities, people who work for the Jewish community, and you can very much tell from Dorothy L. Sayers' writing that she wasn't anti-Semitic. Like, there were no anti-Semitic tropes in this book, and this was published in, like, 1927, when anti-Semitism was all over Britain at the time. Like, look at Agatha Christie's books from the same period. Oh, but he's a Nazi? It's not the best, but we can leave it. I mean, look at Murder on the Orient Express. And the way, not even Jews, I didn't read past the first chapter of that one, but just the way people are depicted there stereotypically. And Dorothy L. Sayers' writing is definitely not that. And she doesn't fall into anti-Semitic tropes, and the characters, for the most part, there was, like, one thing, there was, like, one slip of the tongue, but for the most part, the characters, the way their bodies were described as Jews, when it was irrelevant, she does describe people, she did have the thing of, like, when it was relevant, this was, I think, more prevalent, like, more the same way we would describe clothing now. It was more in that past that they would describe bodies, like, oh, looking at the thin face, whatever. So when it was relevant and a Jew's body was described, it was, except for, like, one tiny part, there was, like, no anti-Semitic words used, like, you could tell it was a Jew. Like, the first time that they see the body, they describe, like, the body of the dead Jew, they describe the body, and I instantly went, oh, that's a Jew, but not because of anti-Semitism, it was just, like, that. That's how half of the people I know look. So why did I have a hard time reading this if Dorothy L. Sayers was so wonderful and not anti-Semitic? Well, we all live in a time that we live in, right? And just the same way as we can read a book from the 90s where someone is very old for disabled rights, but they'll use the word handicapped, or something from the 80s where someone's writing transvestite, and it can make us feel uncomfortable. So someone can be in 1927, as I said, Britain was extremely anti-Semitic, and so Dorothy L. Sayers was living in an extremely anti-Semitic world and society. So first of all, part of it was hard for me was that she depicted it. I think that is something we see less of nowadays, that they'll depict racism or whatever, unless it's like serving a point. But that was just the society she lived in, and I think that's probably because of our society nowadays. It is considered much less okay to be racist out loud. I mean, that's changing now, yes. but until recently, it was considered not okay to be racist out loud, and in her time it was considered fine to be racist out loud, so she depicted that, and that was definitely hard for me to read. And I think it was obviously much harder because of the changes in the past 2 years of the world becoming more anti-Semitic, or more okay to say anti-Semitism out loud. And obviously she says things, and obviously there was, like I mentioned, like she described a Jewish person as sallow, and little things like that. So it just made it hard to read. I don't think she did anything wrong. From what I could see, she was truly not anti-Semitic, and she supported Jews in every way, but it did make it hard to read, and so I don't really know how I feel about the book. Like, I thought that... Okay, I'll tell you how I feel about the ending. So I realized very early on who the murderer was, but I didn't know how all the pieces fit together. And then when all the pieces fit together, it was crazy. It was crazy. So fun. Okay, next book I read, because I talked about that book for, 5 minutes, was Voyage of the Basilisk by Marie Brennan. So this is the third book in the Memoirs of Lady Trent series. And this follows a woman. So Voyage of the Basilisk, I believe, happens in the late 1820s. And basically this series follows this woman who really wants to become a dragon naturalist. She's British, and basically every book follows her traveling around somewhere else in the world to discover dragons. This one was a bit unusual because I'm sure you can tell from the name Voyage of the Basilisk, based off Voyage of the Beagle. So she travels all around the world, and she goes to a lot of places and sees all different types of dragons because she's been traveling all around the world. And I can't say too much about this, obviously, because it is the third in a series, and a lot of what happens in the first book it heavily impacts the rest of the series. But I really like this book so much. Like, literally, I was like, there's this podcast I love listening to. It's called the Myths and Legends Podcast. Go look it up. And a new episode comes out every 2 weeks. In the middle of I was listening to this book, a new episode came out, and I was like, oh my goodness, I have to finish this book, and then I can go listen to that new episode. And then I finished this book. I was like, I tried to listen to a new episode, and I couldn't focus. And I'm talking about, like, I couldn't focus. The episode hadn't started yet. We were in the first 3 minutes, and I just wanted so badly to get already to the next book. That's how much I love that book. So I did get out to the next book, and I'm currently listening to it. Okay. The next book I read was a collection of short stories by Ada Zhang. I think, let's look up how to say that name. Okay, it's pronounced Zhang. So, The Sorrows of Others by Ada Zhang. And I love this. This is a collection that's definitely not for everybody, but I loved it so much. So this is basically a collection of short stories, and they're all just portraits of the person they're following. So sometimes they're following younger people, sometimes much older people. Some of them happen in China, some in the US, all in the same few places in China and the US. So I'm guessing the places that Ada Zhang and her family are from. But I just love this. They were definitely more on the depressing side, but they were so good. I couldn't finish it in one day because it was sad, but they were so good. It's definitely a short book, short stories, and I highly recommend it if character portraits sounds like something you'd be interested in. And it was so interesting also to look at the way that the characters thought, because sometimes you would have two stories with characters that went through similar things, but the way they approached life was totally different. And so you could have two extremely different stories, and I loved it. 5 stars. Okay, so the next book I read, wait, I have it. It's Wish You Were Here by Jodi Picoult. Picoult? How to pronounce that name too. Okay, it's pronounced Picoult. So Wish You Were Here by Jodi Picoult, or Jodi Picoult. And so when I originally read the summary, I thought it was written before Corona. It was made up like, but it was actually written during Corona, and it's about Corona. So we follow this woman, Diana O'Toole, who ends up getting stuck in the Galapagos during Corona. And so I'm going to first of all say that if I did rate books with stars, this would probably be a 2.5 stars. I'm not mad that I read this, but I didn't really enjoy this. I almost DNF'd it. I am glad I skipped ahead a little and saw what the next part was, because there was a giant, massive plot twist. But this wasn't my favorite book at all. Like, what can I say about it that's good, first of all? Let's start with stuff that are good. The writing was extremely easy to get through without actually being boring. I did not think the writing itself was boring. And I thought the plot was interesting, except for the part where I almost DNF'd because it was going, like, just along the lines of what you'd expect, and there was a giant plot twist. So I did think the plot itself was interesting. However, I had two major problems with this, basically. Oh my god, okay, I thought the camera was still paused for a second. So, my first major problem is that the characters are kind of cardboard cutouts. Not really. They're definitely getting to 3D, but they're on the edge. Like, there are some authors, and she is definitely nowhere near the worst of them, but there are definitely some authors, and she is included in them, that think that giving the character backstory is the same as giving them personality. And I think that's exactly why I love Stars of Others so much. That thing I mentioned, where you could have two characters with similar stories but different approaches to life, because everyone is different. So giving a character a backstory does not actually equal personality. You can have two different people who went through the same thing or very similar things, and they will react very differently to it. Like, even just, like, yes, and of course, nurture is a huge part, like their childhoods, what they went through, and we can see similarities and like there's a reason that we know like how people with trauma react to stuff. We can see similarities in how people with trauma who went through childhood trauma think, but not to choose childhood trauma, I'm just mentioning it. But nature is also an important part, and so backstory doesn't actually help. It only helps to a very small degree. And so she did try, especially for her main character, to switch out at some points backstory for personality. The other problem I had with this book was actually at the end. Where at the end, like every 2 paragraphs, she would write down what the meaning of this book is supposed to be, what is the message it's giving us. And I hate books that are moralizing to you. And I definitely, and this one even more so, like she's writing it out every 2 paragraphs, and I was feeling like, why did you even write this book then? Just tweet it out. Just tweet that sentence out. If you're going to literally tell me what you want me to understand from this book, then tweet it out. You shouldn't just write a tweet. Don't write the whole book. I'm going to interact with the book how I interact with it and understand with it what I understand with it. And you can't make me understand what you meant. That's not really how books work. So I got a bit mad about that. So I don't recommend this book, but I'm not mad I read it. And the last book I read in June, for now, I might read another book today, but I kind of doubt it. But the last book I read in June was The Last Watchman of Old Cairo by Michael David Lucas. And another book I really enjoyed, another depressing book I really enjoyed, though it's not actually in and of itself depressing, the author definitely meant it to be hopeful. I just have a different worldview than the author, so I took it, some things he meant as hopeful as depressing, which is kind of depressing if you think about it. But this one is kind of, it has some slight autobiographical elements, but it's not autobiographical really, and it follows 3 stories. So this is all about the Cairo Gniza. I also did a reading blog on this. If you don't know, the Cairo Gniza is a... Okay, let's start with what a Gniza is. Jewish people aren't allowed to throw out papers with the name of God on them. So where do they put it? They put it in a Gniza, which is a special place for those papers. In Cairo, in a shul called a synagogue, called the Ben Ezra Synagogue, they put it in the attic. And there are literally papers from thousands and thousands and thousands of years there. In the 1880s, that collection was brought to Cambridge. So one storyline follows the bringing of the collection to Cambridge, and then the other 2 storylines are more connected. So our modern day happens in 2000, and this book was published in 2018. So that one follows a college student whose father has died and sent him this mysterious piece of paper, which obviously we know is from the Cairo Gniza. And his mother is Jewish and was banished with the rest of the Jews from Egypt in the 1950s. And his father is Muslim and is from a family who has, the oldest son has always been the watchman for the synagogue, the Ben Ezra Synagogue. So he decides to go to Egypt and try to figure out what this mysterious piece of parchment is. The other storyline follows the fake story of how this family, fake family as well, of how this family became the watchman of the Ben Ezra Synagogue. And I thought it was really well done. All the storylines, they never came together, obviously, because they happened hundreds, if not thousands of years apart, but they all connected. I didn't feel like there was a storyline that shouldn't have been there. They all should have been there. They all connected. I didn't feel like there was anything missing either. So yeah, I thought it was really well done, and I think that, and it's really hard to do. Also, I am a person who really does not like POV switches or timeline switches because, you always want to be in the other one. And while I did have a hard time in here a bit, it was because they were so fast, because this is a very short book. So, but I didn't want to be in one more than the other. I just had a hard time with switching because the switches are pretty fast, as this is a short book. Yeah, so that's my only complaint. The switches were too fast, but I really liked it overall. And what is interesting, while his family never watched over a synagogue, the idea he got about the watchman watching over the synagogue for thousands of years is he actually talked to someone from Kolkata in India, where there used to be a huge Jewish community, whose family watched over a synagogue for ages, for thousands of years. The Indian community of Jews in Kolkata is extremely old. Okay, so now let's talk about series, because I did not do good. I completed one series, The Merlin Missions. I continued another, The Memoirs of Lady Trent, and I began 2. So, the 2 I began were the Peter Wimsey series, Whose Body, and what else did I begin? Oh my god. I just literally jumped over and skipped 3 books somehow to tell you. Okay, let's quickly go back. This is already half an hour. This is longer than half an hour because I read so many books and I talk so much. But, okay. So I knew I was missing books. So another one of the books I read, I'll just tell you the other one I started the series was the Book of Coley. But another one of the books I read was Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver. I also had this in a reading vlog where I talked a lot about it. But this was inspired by David Copperfield. I never read David Copperfield, so this is probably why this one better than Anna of California. But this takes place in the 90s, and we follow a young man in the foster care system who eventually gets addicted to opioids. And it's really about the opioid addiction crisis and how it began. So this is an extremely long book. So I did feel it was a bit long, but my main problem with it is, like, I felt it was kind of uninteresting unless you, like me, I personally found it very interesting, but that's because I was very interested in the opioid addiction crisis, which I have kind of heard of before, but I've never, like, heard of how it started. I didn't know it started only in the 90s. It's not that long ago, and so it was really interesting seeing how it started and everything, but I didn't think it was that interesting a book if you're not interested in that. Okay, next book that I read way back when, I knew I was missing a book I really, really loved. So, which is this next one, obviously, because I didn't really, really love Demon Copperhead. Was In the Night of Memory by Linda Lagarde Grover, which I also read in the same vlog I read Demon Copperhead in. And this is a book about these two girls who are in the foster care system, and they are Native American. And this book is kind of divided into two parts. One part when they're not with their family, and the other part when they go to live with their family. Not their mom. Their mom has disappeared, but their family find out they're in foster care. They weren't in contact with the mom, and because of the Indian Child Welfare Act, which said that Native American children in foster care should always first go to their tribe, if at all possible, they get adopted into this family. And there isn't much to say about this, but I love this book. I thought it was written so beautifully, and even though not much really happened, it was just like the portrait of a family. It was just told very nicely. Okay, and then the actual last book I read in June, even though it's not the actual last book I read in June, but the actual last book that I have to say for this vlog was the Book of Coley by M.R. Carey, which is the other series I started, and I don't regret it. So this is a sci-fi dystopia. It happens hundreds, if not at least 1,000 years later in the future, and this world has been genetically engineered to a point where, accidentally, obviously, but where the plants are dangerous. They're, like, craving the meat. They want to eat the meat. And our main character, Coley, lives in a fortified village, and it's hard to say much at the beginning without giving any spoilers, because the plot only gets really started in the middle. But basically, and if I don't say anything, it will just sound like a normal sci-fi book. Like, and I really liked it, so I wanted to sound not like a normal sci-fi book, and I convinced everyone to read it. But basically, he ends up leaving the village, and there's an AI character who is extremely interesting because without spoilers, she starts from being a regular response web AI and becomes a futuristic AI. Now, what's extremely interesting about that, to me, is this book was not written that long ago. And obviously, in the past 2 years, we have ChatGPT, we have Gemini, all these AIs, which are not response web AIs, but so it suddenly feels old-fashioned that at the beginning she is a response web AI, and you can also very much see in the writing that she's a response web AI. So I thought that was very interesting, and I will get to a minute what response web AI is if you don't know, but I just want to talk about this book for a second. I really loved it. The writing style is written in dialect. Oh, so was Orleans. So I liked it that I read 2 books that both were written in dialects in future. The only thing that I saw that a lot of people on Goodreads were annoyed by this, and I don't know why. I'm going to be honest, I think it's because it was British people, but not the people on Goodreads. The fact that they've been taught not to make fun of dialects of non-British, of non-white people. Our main character isn't white, so it's kind of weird to say this, but they don't react to British people, to British dialects in the same way that because they haven't been taught, and they've been taught like it's okay to make fun of them. Anyways, the only problem I had with that is that should've, could've, would've was written as should OV, and like our main character is illiterate. I know that people make spelling mistakes of writing it should OV instead of should apostrophe VE, but our main character is illiterate. He doesn't know. So that kind of annoyed me. But I just thought this book was so good. It definitely started off a little slow, and I was like, when is it actually going to get started? But when our main character starts to discover things, you see that this world is just so interesting. I thought it was built in a very interesting way. And what we have, and I'm excited to see what he discovers next. So those are actually all the books I read in June, and if you're curious about what a response AI is, I will explain now very badly. And if you are curious, because you already know and probably know better than me, turn the video off, because this is 40 minutes by now. I still haven't made an introduction. So basically, response web AI is the older kind of AI, you know, from 2 years ago. Remember them? And basically, well, sorry about that. And so basically the AI, what it would have is it would have a web of responses. So someone would say, so they would tell them if someone says X, you can reply A, B, or C. And then if they reply Z, then you can reply this and this and this. And you could definitely, and it was definitely more so in the older AIs, like in the actually old AIs from like the 2000s, if anyone remembers SmartBot. And you could definitely see, like, they would repeat the same things, and they didn't actually have that much to say because there's a limited amount of responses you can put in. And obviously the AIs nowadays, the new AIs, ChatGPT, have just been trained on just tons of text. They just throw in a bunch of text, and the AIs learn what are the correct responses to what kind of subjects through that. And it definitely took them, I remember them developing this way back when in 2010, and definitely took them time to figure out a bunch of quirks. But yeah. Wait one moment.